Well, good day everybody, it's Zero back at you again with another History Buff Reacts video, and today we're taking a look at another simple history video. They've done a lot more videos on Stranger Things than I thought they did, so I thought I'd give them a watch, to be honest, because some of this stuff I've heard of, most of this I haven't, and this is one of them. The only land battle fought on US soil in World War II. The whole thing about the US and World War II was that I assumed they hadn't fought a land battle in World War II, on US soil in World War II. That was kind of the whole point. This is interested me, and I can see from where I've paused, it says Canada? I have no idea where this is going to go, so hopefully you're ready. Let's learn some shit. Let's go.
The Aleutian Islands Campaign. Attu and Kiska, territory of Alaska.
Alaska, okay.
The Aleutian Islands Campaign was a military campaign led by U.S. and Canadian forces on the islands of Attu and Kiska. It was the only land battle fought on U.S. soil in World War II. Apart from that, the invasion of the Kiska Island, known as Operation Cottage, is remembered as one of the most bizarre actions in the entire war.
Okay.
During 2 days of sweeping the island, Allied forces had more than 300 casualties, while the Japanese had none. The reason for this was that there were no Japanese soldiers to fight in the first place. In June and July 1942, the Japanese forces, led by Admiral Yamamoto, invaded the Aleutian Islands of Attu and Kiska. The Japanese did this as a diversion from their Midway campaign, but also to prevent the Aleutians being used as a forward base for the Americans to attack Japan. Capturing the island was a relatively easy job for the Japanese forces, as it was defended by negligible forces, 10 U.S. Navy officers from an American weather station.
That's it.
As soon as they took control of the islands, the Japanese started building airfields and fortification systems in the inland mountains. They even brought in 500 civilians to build new military bases, tunnels, and harbors.
So, hold on. Right, so far, they've got the diversionary invasion from Midway, obviously to preoccupy the Americans elsewhere. And they're building fortifications, they're building all sorts, air bases, fortifications, looks like pillboxes as well. Where's this going then?
Since the Americans were fighting Japan primarily for the domination over the Pacific Ocean, there was no doubt for them that the islands had to be liberated as soon as possible.
Right.
There was also another reason why the United States was so eager to get its territory back. Kiska and Attu were the first pieces of American territory to be conquered since the War of 1812 with the United Kingdom. Their repatriation was therefore a matter of national pride as well. The islands were under the protection of the Alaska Defense Command, or ADC, which only had 24,000 members. The U.S. Army didn't waste its time and immediately started building up its troops in Alaska for the upcoming invasion. By autumn 1942, the size of the ADC had increased to over 94,000. The first target was the island of Attu. Attu was of secondary importance compared with Kiska, which had a fully developed harbor, an operational airfield, and a larger garrison. However, by aiming to conquer Attu first, the U.S. Army wanted to cut the Japanese communication with Kiska.
Okay, this all makes sense so far. They want to get Attu first, cut off Kiska, and cut off the Japanese forces on Kiska, and then just steamroll it basically with 94,000 troops. I don't know where this is going. There's going to be a turn in there somewhere.
Operation Land Crab. After almost a year of occupation, Navy ships carrying the 17th Infantry Regiment of the 7th Infantry Division of the U.S. Army approached Attu on May 11, 1943. Landing on the island went unopposed, which gave American soldiers a false impression that it was going to be an easy task for them. The Japanese had intentionally withdrawn from the coast to prepared fortifications and bunkers in the inland mountains. They used the natural defenses as well, such as the caves and crevices. Over there, they showed a fierce resistance to American troops, fighting to the very end. After 19 days of battle, only 28 Japanese soldiers out of 2,630 of the 301st Infantry Battalion survived. The Americans also suffered enormous casualties. 3,829 men out of 16,000 engaged.
Wow, that's a lot.
Many of these were due to unsuitable equipment, which led to the soldiers getting frostbite and other medical conditions.
Oh yeah.
On top of this, many of the soldiers had never seen active combat. The Attu experience was horrifying for the American soldiers and largely influenced what happened on Kiska a few months later.
Yeah, so why am I getting flashbacks to the Winter War? Inappropriate equipment and inexperience. There's going to be a major mistake done here by someone. What? So what was it, 16,000 deployed and they had over 3,000 losses? That's a lot for an island. For an island that size, that's a lot.
Operation Cottage. Aerial reconnaissance of Kiska recorded a whole system of fortifications similar to those on Attu. Besides, intelligence estimated that they were to expect around 10,000 Japanese soldiers. Everything was indicating that Kiska was to be the next Attu. However, in late July, reconnaissance planes recorded reduced Japanese activity on the island. There was almost no anti-aircraft fire, no movements in the harbor, and destroyed buildings were not repaired. Even radio communications were missing. The radio signals stopped entirely on July 28th. However, the signals of something being very wrong were ignored by Vice Admiral Kincaid. This might have been because the Americans had the events of Attu fresh on their minds. During July, the U.S. Air Force and Navy had conducted severe bombings and shellings of the island, leading some officers to think that this may have forced the Japanese to leave the island. Vice Admiral Thomas Kincaid, who was in charge of the entire operation, had a different impression. He thought that the Japanese had withdrawn to their labyrinth of tunnels and trenches inland, as they did on Attu.
I mean, that would make sense. You know, they've already done it once. You think they'd do it again? And the Japanese were hell-bent on fighting to the end. If they'd gone into Kiska with the same sort of mindset, it was going to be hard to dislodge them again, and morale would have been even less for the Americans because they'd already suffered severe losses at Attu. Okay. No, so hang on. Also, no radio communications and very little movement. Yeah, I mean, they could have been holed out in the caves, I guess. Yeah, it makes sense to me.
For him, there was no doubt that the Americans would have to fight bitterly for the island. For the liberation of Kiska, the U.S. Army engaged more than 34,000 soldiers of the 7th Infantry Division, including the 17th Infantry Regiment, the 53rd Infantry Regiment, the 184th Infantry Regiment, the 4th Infantry Regiment, the 87th Mountain Infantry Regiment, and the 1st Special Service Force. Except for the 1st Special Service Force, this force consisted of young and inexperienced soldiers. For most, this was their first combat experience.
I see something going wrong.
For the invasion of Kiska, U.S. forces were reinforced by 5,300 Canadians of the 13th Royal Canadian Infantry Brigade, codenamed the Green Light Force. This unit included the Winnipeg Grenadiers, the Rocky Mountain Rangers, the Canadian Fusiliers, and other smaller formations. On August 15, 1943, American troops began their landing operation on the middle part of the island, coming from the north. Their entire operation went badly from the start, as ships carrying tanks became stranded because of poor tide calculations. Stranded ships then caused a traffic jam, causing a great delay. Luckily, for the Allied forces, their landing was unopposed, as there was no Japanese resistance. However, this didn't give the American soldiers any peace of mind. They were well aware that they were in the same situation as their comrades were on Attu. Dense fog and extremely cold winds increased the feeling of anxiety and disorientation. On August 16th, American soldiers began moving inland. On the same day, northwest from their positions, the Canadians began their landing operation. As both contingents were moving slowly through dense fog and cold rain, they found no Japanese resistance. All they could find were abandoned positions and an unusual discovery: one dog named Explosion that used to belong to the American soldiers who were captured by Japanese Marines in the initial landings a year ago.
Right, so you've got two different forces landing at two different sites in really bad weather conditions. I think I think I can see where this is going now. And if it goes the way I think it's going, this is going to be interesting.
At the same time, the American and Canadian troops were suffering casualties. Talk spread amongst the troops that there were Japanese snipers and soldiers around, which created a sense of panic. Many of them bumped into Japanese minefields and booby traps, which were very difficult to notice because of the fog that reduced visibility to less than a few feet.
Yeah.
The destroyer, Abner Reed, struck a mine when entering the harbor on Kiska, killing 70 sailors and wounding 47. But adding greatly to the disaster was when many of the killed and wounded soldiers were victims of sporadic friendly fire. As soon as troops landed, they spread out through the thick fog. On August 16th, a Canadian soldier mistakenly fired on American soldiers, believing they were Japanese. It caused a friendly fire shootout that resulted in 28 Americans and 4 Canadians killed. Around 50 men were wounded on either side. Inexperienced soldiers were terrified by the stories of the Attu carnage and disoriented by the harsh weather conditions and poor visibility caused by the fog.
Yep.
Brian Murphy, a U.S. Army lieutenant who was at Kiska during the ordeal, later recalled that the troops were shooting at anything that moved. One infantryman attacked what he thought was an enemy patrol, and despite patrol members shouting at him to stop, he proceeded to throw grenades. He was then immediately shot by friendly fire.
Wow. Okay, yeah, this went the way I was thinking it was going to go. Dense fog, miscommunication. Wasn't expecting the part about the hidden or suspected hidden Japanese forces. God. So yeah, they were so terrified and so nervous they would literally shot anything that moved. Imagine that on a grand scale. Holy shit.
They had anticipated a surprise Japanese attack at any moment. With their nerves on edge, these young soldiers fired upon the slightest suspicion of enemy presence. After 3 days of patrolling the island, American and Canadian soldiers finally realized that there was no enemy to fight, as the Japanese had already left Kiska. After the Second World War had ended, it became known, through interrogations, that the decision to retreat from Kiska was made after the Battle of Attu back in May. Japanese soldiers were also frightened by the Attu scenario, and were additionally aware that any resistance was pointless. In a situation when the Japanese army was desperately in need for soldiers, they were allowed to return to posts closer to home. Back on July 28th, they were carried by several cruisers and destroyers. 5,000 Japanese soldiers had broken through the American naval blockade. They did it with the help of the thick fog. Operation Cottage was met with condemnation in the American press, even though the islands were liberated from the enemy. 92 killed in action and 221 wounded soldiers was a lot to take in for a battle with no enemy present. Lessons were learned from Operation Cottage, and the disastrous landing operations proved to be a good drill for similar campaigns until the end of the war.
I suppose you've got that going for it, I guess. It's a good training regimen for seaborne landings. Oh, that's crazy, though. The only land battle fought on US soil in World War II was against some Japanese on Attu. But then they were essentially fighting themselves and the Canadians on Kiska. I wonder I'd never heard of this. I don't think they wanted anyone to hear about this. And that's going to be the end of the video. Thank you very much for watching, guys. If you did enjoy it, please make sure to press those like and subscribe buttons and also hit that bell so you know when I upload. This has been an interesting video. I'm really looking forward to getting some more of these out. And the Weird and Stupid History videos are nearly done. They are very nearly done, and I'm very happy about it. Well, actually, by the time this video goes out, it might already be done. That's actually quite likely now that I think about it. But if you do want to see some more, check out over here. You will see the most recent video apart from this one at the top over here, and down below that you will see the whole History Buff Reacts playlist of all the History Buff videos I've done on this channel. I've been Zero. This has been the only land battle fought on US soil by Simple History. I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.